Like the other branches of Lincoln City Libraries, we have a display of some music books for Black History Month here at the Polley Music Library. Today I wanted to talk a little about those books and remind you that there are lots and lots more books featuring Black artists that you can find in Polley. If anything, it's difficult to pick just a few books to highlight in a video or to put on a display, as the history of music, especially American music history, is very much the history of contributions and innovations by Black artists. But hopefully a few of these books sound interesting to you, and they might lead you to check out even more of the great books we have here in Polley. So here's some highlights you can check out today. Whatever It Takes by Tom Morello. Music 781.66 Morello. Tom Morello is one of the most legendary rock guitarists of our time, having been a founding member of Rage Against the Machine, and then going on to play with Audioslave, Prophets of Rage, and his solo act, The Night Watchman. Not only is he known for his inventive guitar playing, which includes some very creative use of effects and extended techniques, but he's among the very few artists who carried the traditions of protest music forward into the 90s and beyond. In Whatever It Takes, Morello offers us a little bit of an autobiography, but done through the context of a photo book. There's a section devoted to his childhood, then a string of early bands he played in before Rage Against the Machine, and then lots of cool ephemera related to the rise of Rage and his work in subsequent bands. There are fun anecdotes here that you'll appreciate if you're a guitar player, just a fan of any of the bands Morello has worked with, or if you're a songwriter hoping to make a mark yourself. Beyonce in Formation, Remixing Black Feminism by Omasike Tinsley. Music 781.66 Beyonce. Author Tinsley is noted for starting an undergraduate class called Beyonce Feminism, Rihanna Womanism back in 2015. And this book expands on the class concept by analyzing Beyonce's 2016 album and film, Lemonade. Here we find a deep analysis of Black womanhood that includes issues of sexuality and gender, historical analysis of Black women in music that goes back to the legacy of Depression-era country blues to the present, and the history of struggle around Black women's labor in music and more generally. The book goes back and forth in narrative between Beyonce's work and personal experiences of Tinsley and her family. It's an intense book, and rightly so, as these are intense and important subjects that are rarely discussed so frankly. Free Jazz, Harmolodics, and Ornette Coleman by Stephen Rush. Music 781.65 Coleman. Ornette Coleman is widely regarded as a key figure in modern jazz music, and his work largely laid the foundation for generations of players who moved toward forms of improvisation that don't stay tightly linked to a harmonic foundation, often called free jazz or free improvisation. All was not completely free in Ornette's world, however. His work generally exemplified his own harmolodic theory, or harmolodics, in which harmony, melody, and rhythm take on unique moment-to-moment relationships approaching a unique kind of conceptual unity. Ornette used harmolodics compositionally, and lacking any kind of formal text, a book was planned in the 1970s but never completed. He and his band's adventurous improvisations serve as both the textbook and the application of the idea. Lots of music made by Ornette and his circle over the last 50 years employ harmolodic concepts. But lacking much written explanation, the idea remains misunderstood by many musicians and much of the listening public. Enter Stephen Rush, whose recent Free Jazz, Harmolodics, and Ornette Coleman makes great strides toward representing and clarifying the underlying concepts in this approach to music. Rush, a music professor at the University of Michigan, has taught a class on harmolodics for 30 years, and composes and improvises fluently within a harmonic framework with his own bands. Using detailed analysis of music samples and through extensive conversations with Ornette Coleman himself, Rush has written an essential book that addresses technical, philosophical, and social implications of harmolodics. If you're into Ornette, or you feel like you're close to getting his music but not quite there, this is the book for you. Gay Gorilla, Julius Eastman and His Music by Mary Jane Leach. Music 780.92 EASTMAN. Julius Eastman was a composer and singer whose work has mostly languished in obscurity since his death in 1990. As a composer, Eastman was known as a bit of a provocateur in the East Coast new music scenes of the 1970s and 80s. As interesting as his music was, and is, his choices of titles sometimes led to controversies, causing the titles of his works to be left off concert programs. Truth be told, he remains ahead of his time in that regard. We can't say the names of several of his works on the radio or print them in a newspaper over 40 years after their composition either. But there is far more to the work of Julius Eastman than pure provocation, and what provocation there is embedded in his works seems very prescient toward contemporary discussions happening in the arts and socio-political circles. As a gay black man working in a mostly straight white environment and community, Eastman didn't hide his struggles to find peace in a society that often seemed to reject him and those like him. As the decades have passed and we continue to wrestle with these issues as a society, perhaps it's no surprise that there is a resurgence in interest in Eastman's music in the last decade, including performances, retrospective recordings, and now this first book that looks critically at his work. Move On Up, Chicago Soul Music and Black Cultural Power by Aaron Cohen, Music 781.66 COH. This book is an excellent history of Chicago's soul scene from the 1960s to the 1980s, which produced lots of memorable hits, but was also a powerful vehicle of black empowerment. This is a deeply researched book, but Cohen's style makes it read almost like an action novel at times. It's obvious that he's a huge fan of the art and the music, as he shares both the musical and community-building excitement behind Chicago soul. What Are You Doing Here? A Black Woman's Life and Liberation in Heavy Metal by Lena Dawes, Music 781.66 DAWES. What Are You Doing Here addresses racism and sexism in heavy metal, punk, and hardcore music scenes from the perspective of a black woman who is both a longtime fan of the music and a music critic who has written about these scenes for most of her career. Dawes switches between sharing her own perspective and interviewing lots of other women of color who have been lifelong fans of this music or musicians themselves. Check It While I Wreck It, Black Womanhood, Hip-Hop Culture, and the Public Sphere by Gwendolyn D. Pugh, Music 781.649 POU. This book is fairly academic in nature, having come out of a doctoral thesis originally, but it hits on some more expansive areas of women's activities in hip-hop, looking at hip-hop itself not just as a musical genre, but more broadly as a whole cultural movement. Pugh discusses some intense issues like black feminism's role in hip-hop, women's narratives and representation within the culture, and even how these representations of hip-hop culture have spilled out into films and novels. Check It While I Wreck It is deeply researched and raises a number of deeper cultural issues around the music, the culture, and women's roles within it, centering womanhood, transcending stereotypes, and uniting generations. The Beautiful Ones by Prince, Music 781.66 PRINCE. This is as close as we will ever get to the lovely autobiography fans had always wanted from Prince, which had been started in 2016, but tragically not completed before his untimely death. Editor Dan Piepenbring includes a long introduction in which he explains how the book was finished. Prince had begun the work, signed a book contract, and started to pen portions of his own memoir, and interestingly had pulled some items in his famous vault toward its entrance related to what he had written. With these starting points, and with the collaboration and blessing of his trust, The Beautiful Ones was completed. It probably doesn't have as much actual text as a book would have had if Prince had remained with us, but instead we have the words he did leave us, amplified with lots of incredible photos, artwork, and performance ephemera that help to tell his story. There are lots of handwritten portions and original lyric sheets too. Ultimately, it becomes a complicated book, a celebration of his life and work, but also full of grieving, in that he left us when things didn't seem complete. But for what it does contain, we can be grateful. It's Our Music Too, The Black Experience in Classical Music, by Earl O'Farry Hutchinson, Music 781.68 HUT. It goes without saying that the history of jazz, blues, soul, R&B, hip-hop, and many forms of dance, electronic, and pop music are all histories full of contributions from black artists. But not as much is said about the involvement of black artists in the history, development, and present in the world of classical music. It's Our Music Too is a great introduction to the many black composers and performers that are part of classical music history, including important figures like composer and violinist George Bridgetower and Joseph Boulogne, Chevalier St. Georges. We find that black music was a large influence on the work of many 20th century composers like Dvorak, Stravinsky, Gershwin, Copland, and Ravel, who turned early strains of jazz like ragtime music into concert music almost immediately. One really great thing about this book is that it features recommended listening suggestions at regular intervals throughout the book. So this book can become more than just reading about the music and musicians involved. You can easily go out and find some of this material to hear for yourself as you read along. In fact, a lot of the examples can be found using the Music Online database that you can access on the Lincoln City Library's website. Hip Hop Family Tree by Ed Piscor, Music 789.1649 PIS. I wanted to get this series of books included in this book talk to remind you that you can even find a few graphic novel formatted books in the Polley Music Library. The Hip Hop Family Tree series started life as an online illustrated series on Boing Boing, and then they were turned into an amazing 4-volume set of large format graphic novels. We have the whole set here in Polley, and these are just so cool. Volume 1 takes you back to the very early days of hip-hop, starting with DJ Kool Herc's Parties in the Bronx, up to about 1981. And then each successive volume moves ahead chronologically by another couple of years, eventually taking us up to 1985. The illustrations are phenomenal, and then there are larger pin-up, page-sized illustrations at the end of each volume, along with recommended listening lists and an index so you can find your favorite early hip-hop artist within each book quickly. If you know someone who is more inclined to read graphic novels, these are a great set of books to check out. So there's a look at just a tiny sample of the books we have at the Polley Music Library that help to celebrate Black History Month and the many contributions by Black artists in the world of music. These books are available to check out or put on hold today. You can find the Polley Music Library on the second floor of the Bennett Martin Library, downtown at 14th and N Streets. And if you have any questions about these or any other music books, I'm always glad to help. You can reach me at Polley, Polley, at lincolnlibraries.org or by calling 402-441-8520.